You're listening to the Art Said podcast, episode number 11, collaboration. Who's got time for that? Welcome to the Art Said podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts and education, hosted by educators and artists Shauna Longo and Edric DeBose. Morning, Edric. I think it's afternoon. Good afternoon, Edric.
Good
Here we
afternoon.
are getting started with another episode. We're excited to be back talking to everybody. So this morning, the last episode, and previously, actually, not even the last episode, I had a conversation with Dr. Matthew Murphy, and we were talking about redefining creativity. And so we're going to start there today before we dig into collaboration, because we feel like we need to kind of redefine what is creative work.
Right. So creativity is, and this is the thing I find myself talking about a lot. Creativity is not really so much the production, the work itself. It's not the work of art. It's not the painting. It's not the performance. It's not. It's really something that takes place internally, inside. First of all, it's really about the ideas and the way of thinking. So it's something takes place in the mind. And my favorite example of this is a writer. If you could watch a writer go out to the beach, set up an umbrella, read 3 books of poetry and a book on a biographical historical biography, and it looks like they're just hanging out, but it's actually work. That's what their process of working through to get to the ideas that they're going to be working from and creating from. So again, creativity is not just what the result. It's an inner process that goes on.
Absolutely. And when you're working with like a collaborative team, it can be an ongoing kind of mind meld.
Right. So again, it's not something that where you're necessarily together in the same space, but you're together in the same mental territory, and you kind of develop in something. When it's a good team, you can just trust that person is also working on that same idea. I mean, for me, it happens a lot with music, with my band. We'll working on a song, and then I just know that song is already playing in everybody else's head, and so the next time we get together to rehearse, all those ideas are going to show up. So it's really sort of understanding that process of a mental collaboration that's going on, even though you're not physically in the same space. I think for most people, it's like you think about a friend of yours, a close friend. Whenever you talk to that friend again, you kind of pick up the same place you left off, and it's at the same level of depth,
This is like really the defining our friendship, right, Edric? Like this is how we work, right? And now we're no longer in the same place, but we're using this podcast as a vehicle to continue our conversations where we have a thought, we put it down, and then the two of us kind of like grow it into something.
Yeah. So when you said welcome to the podcast, I almost said maybe we should say welcome to lunch.
Yeah, welcome to lunch. Yes, for serious. and that's what's really funny about this episode is how we're going to talk about like who's got time for collaboration. Right. Is that like, here's the thing, there's never going to be enough time, right? That's like the number one thing all of us wish people had told us before we started teaching was there's never enough time for anything. You name it, and I'm going to say there's never enough time. There's always so much more we want to do in every capacity.
Even if something you want, you feel like you should be doing, even if it's part of the work. You think about grading papers, right? If you're grading essays, term papers, you don't really have the time to invest in reading all of them in every detail and commenting on the way you want to. You actually literally don't have that time. If you have like 90 students, I mean, like and you're going to spend 5 minutes on each one of those. How much time is that already? So you have to find a way to streamline what you consider to be the most essential things and somehow work from that. I think that's what everybody does, right? You even with the classroom, there's so much going on. You've got 30 kids in a classroom. You have to figure out a way that you're going to drive the largest group. You're going to have to catch the stragglers, and you have to give the kids that are ahead, make sure they get something that keeps them engaged.
Right. And the same way you make agreements with yourself about what you have to prioritize in life, we have to share an agreement with others about the focus or meaning of our collaboration. And sometimes you need to do it outwardly, right? You need to literally make an agreement about what is this going to look like. And then sometimes it just happens organically. Like we never had like any form of like formal agreement. It just kind of evolved.
Right, which was what most collaborations are about. I mean, especially when you're working closely with someone in an ideal sense. But even if it's not someone that you're so connected to, there can be a commitment to the quality of the production. Or I think what I'm really trying to get to here is what it means internally to you. So every teacher, every teacher I know, they'll tell you it's about the kids, or
Right.
it's something like that. There's an internal aspect of what drives them, and that's really what I'm talking about in terms of the collaboration process. One, yes, it's externally, it's the goal, whatever the project is, but internally, it's also there's something that you're getting out of it that you're working for.
Absolutely. And so it's that you need that agreement on what are our outcomes and what are our expectations. And that's kind of like Bloom's synthesis, right?
Right. So you're putting familiar pieces together to make something new, right? So, but when you talk about outcomes and expectations, I think also it's important to really redefine expectations, because again, as you and I know,
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time breaking down terms. And what do you mean by that word? And so,
Right.
because it's not obvious, it's not, and especially somebody you're less familiar with, you use these same terms and same words, but it's not necessarily obvious what you mean by that. I find there's just too much missing space in definitions in that sort of a way. So it's like UBD, understanding by design. We all know what it kind of sort of means, but when you really dig into it, it starts to mean something else, or STEAM or STEM. Think of any of those acronyms. And but once you start to dig in, the meaning is levels deeper. So when you talk about expectations and terms and language that you're using, all those things become important to have an effective collaboration.
Well, and I think people need to be okay with asking someone to go deeper, like explain to me, what do you mean by that? I think that sometimes collaboration goes wrong when we just go off of assumptions. And so the really quality collaboration between individuals happens when you're willing to have hard conversations and really dig in and go deeper into what people are saying and really find out what they're bringing to that definition, right? Because we all have different definitions because we have different experiences and we're different individuals. And so
Right.
I think that's really important piece of it, that you have to be okay with being uncomfortable with explaining yourself, and don't take that in a negative way, but like being willing to kind of give a piece of yourself.
But part of it's trust, that,
Yes.
in terms of the motivation of the other person. So I think about Brian, who we did an interview with earlier. Brian and I worked together
Right.
closely, and we would argue things. We would argue things out until there was nothing left to argue about, and that was the goal. That was the understanding we had. The understanding we had is we're going to argue this out until we're done with it, and whatever the best idea is, the best idea wins.
Yep.
And that was our process, and that was our agreement. So we didn't get offended, I don't think that works. That doesn't make sense to me.
No.
It's because I knew that the motivation, the intent that was behind those comments was just to make a better product, make better music, or to make a better, production. It was always that.
Right. And that's where like who is this for, right? And that's what you have to agree upon. What does this work mean for our audience and what does it mean for ourselves? And that's all a piece of this collaboration, is defining what it is. And sometimes you may not want to just have that conversation, but you both have to be on the same page about what the intent is. Who is this for? What does it mean for our audience and what does it mean for ourselves?
Right.
Is really, really important. And you have to agree upon a process, right? Or mode of working, and have a definition of what is success, or how are we meeting our goals? Because your goals are going to evolve over time. So how do you know what you're collaborating on is doing any good, right?
Right. So you will work on something, you get a certain kind of result. It won't necessarily, might not be the result you wanted, but it'll be
Absolutely.
something. And so I think questions like "Who's this for?" are really great questions, because it brings you back to, okay, well, what are we really doing here? What's the point? So this is the result we got. This is who this is for. This is what our motivation is. How do we make that adjustment? So collaboration in that sense, it's like creative work. You know, it's really a process of creative work, and that's why I think the arts are important. And most business that's done these days, and especially going forward, is going to require that. You're going to have to be making constant adjustments. If you just think about the technology, technology changes, faster and faster. Every 5 years, every whatever the mode was 5 years ago, not at all. And that's going to become 3 years. Then it's going to become 2 years. It's
It can
going to
become
be
minutes eventually.
that's what it feels like. It's gonna be
100%.
minutes,
Well, and when you talk about that, what you're going to need, what people need in their jobs more now than ever, it's all about communication, connection, and engagement, right? These meaningful experiences, that's what's necessary to sustain forward progress in anything we do. Communication, connection, and engagement. And really, that's what we need to instill in our students
So
as well.
I think part of it is just increasing your expectation of what collaboration means, because everybody's been on a committee.
Yeah.
I
Some are better than others.
I was thinking about George Carlin when he talked to the press corps for the annual press corps thing. And he said, first of all, we're going to have a committee to get together, and then we're going to create an initiative, and then after that initiative, we're going to make recommendations. And after we make so he says an initiative is where an idea is where a good idea goes to die. That's what he calls it. So we've all been
in education. We're all an initiative overload, and they all
Yes.
go to die. Everybody expects that, right?
Right. So I think when one of the ways of thinking about collaboration and keeping it real for you is that you are fighting to find a way to get a sense of progress and a sense of movement, and that's really really important. The other piece of it too is I think you have to find connections that are fun. I mean, because I think about just some of the teachers I've collaborated with. I mean, usually there's a thing that it starts with. It starts with a joke that you make. Oh, you realize, oh, this person has a sense of humor. The important one for me that I'm going to talk about here is with arts integration. When arts integration was a newer initiative in the district we were working with, there was a particular teacher who also had to be head of the union,
Mhm.
who I found out was a Star Trek geek, and I was like, oh, what you? And so am I, and that became our connection. For years until he retired. But that began a collaboration. So he really loved. Of course, he was a history teacher. I love art history. So those two things came together very, very easily for us, to the point where when he was doing his finals, he started including works of art in part of his final at the end of the year.
And that's what that collaboration is about. It's about inspiring each other to look at things through different lights, right? Because you're sharing your experience, you're sharing your thoughts and what's going to go. And so when you're participating in collaborative efforts, people need to develop personal and organizational expectations on how they're going to be treated, how are disagreements going to be handled, what they can contribute, how much commitment will be required, what challenges they face, what resources they need, how decisions will be made and implemented, what they hope to see accomplished, and how their efforts are going to be evaluated. Because these are all aspects of like having quality collaboration.
I think an important part of that is the resources you're going to need, because you're going to need support from other areas, and sometimes that may or may not come. Right.
Absolutely. And I think that when we talk about those resources, we have to think about like, well, one resource is time, right? Which we started this podcast saying we never have enough of. So when can this happen when we never have enough time? Well, it could just be a lot of my collaborations happened in the hallways passing. That's how you and the collaboration you were talking about with Jim happened, right? It was passing in the hallway.
Mhm.
They
Right.
happen randomly. And then it's what you take from that random moment. It's what do you do with it? You make this connection, and then where do you go with it? That's what really takes it into a collaboration realm.
And when that connection has meaning, like I said, you realize that person is also working on that thing in the back of their head at the same time. Again, another thing about creativity. If you look at creativity, one of the things they often talk about is that notion of the idea that comes to you when you're taking a shower. The idea that comes to you as you're driving. The thing, because the point is, the brain is always working. The brain is always working. So there's in the back of your mind somewhere, you're always working on that idea if it's meaningful to you, right?
Right.
So that way, those conversations passing in the hallway can be meaningful, because it's just you're meeting. It's part of a process that's already going on internally.
And listen, our biggest time to collaborate, Edric and I, was while we had our lunch every single day. And so when I was moving into a new role and I was going to be leaving the district and we weren't going to be able to physically have lunch every day together and sit and just talk and collaborate and communicate, that's how this podcast happened, folks. Like, it totally came out of this is an extension of our lunch chats. You're literally this podcast. You guys are all getting an inside track into what Edric and I would talk about every single day. And we just continue to have that time and that collaboration through this podcast. So find what works for you.
Yeah. But my emphasis though, it's a creative process. It's important to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not about like people get stuck on we need common planning time. Well, yeah, that'd be great, but like that's just not reality, folks. Especially if you're in the arts realm. Like we get no common planning time. We're everybody else's prep, and we're always teaching at the same time as the people that are everybody else's prep who we want to collaborate with. or if they're on prep and we're teaching their kids, so we can't collaborate with them. So it's about those random text messages or group texts that you can spark this collaboration. Or listen, Google's a part of culture, right? Or whatever your district uses, there's some way. Sharing Google Docs, Google Spaces to get conversations going, Google Meet, Zoom, FaceTime, having virtual chats. Facebook groups are a great way to collaborate with others that might be around the world. And there's this app called GroupMe. We're getting no kickback on this by advertising, folks, but we wish. But GroupMe is an app that like doesn't require you to have somebody's phone number or be in your contacts, but you can create little groups. So I've got a few literally PLCs going of different groups I've been involved with, like County Teachers of the Year. We have a GroupMe group where we have an ongoing chat. We can ask each other questions. I have another one with some people I was in a postgraduate, getting my principal certification program here in New Jersey called NJXL. We have that still going, all of us. It was our back chat while we were in classes virtually, and now it's just continued to evolve as a PLC where if we have a question and we want to get other thoughts of people in other districts around the state, we can throw it in there. So you got to find your different tribes and then find how you can just have that collaboration happen when you may not be able to be in the same time at the same place ever.
Right. The other piece of it, I'll just finish with this, is I think that the collaboration or looking for those kinds of outlets or those kinds of connections will feed you. It's
100%.
It's part of what keeps you alive and keeps you engaged, because it's not just about what's going on in your particular building, but it's really about this community that's taking place. And you know, I think it's important that's one of the ways of keeping yourself alive.
We need it to sustain, because it's hard. What we all do in education is hard work. And so we need people to help lift us up. We need people to make us not feel like we're alone, or it's just us, or is this just happening to me? No, it's probably not. I guarantee there's somebody else out there that's dealing with something very similar to you. Or maybe like, oh, I don't have it so bad. It could be worse. There's value in that as well. You don't need to rub it in someone's face, but there is value in that. So at the end of the day, you know, who's got time for that? You got to make the conversations happen, right? You know, Edric and I, we invited each other into our rooms for lunch. We just started that, right? I used to go for a walk with a teacher at least 1 or 2 days a week. So get out of the building and go for a walk. I know some people are like, oh my gosh, how do you have time for that? You just make the time, right? You just say, I'm going to go out of this building for 15 minutes and just walk in the town and just get that fresh air. It really can clear your mind and help you. Bring a friend along that might have the same break as you or whatever, and go grab a coffee or something.
Yeah.
But it's important.
Yep. Well, that's all I really want to say. It's
so listen, who's got time for that? You got to find a way around the who's got time for that to make it work for you. Don't worry about the time factor. There's always ways.
But if it's meaningful, you'll find the time.
Absolutely.
Think about anything important to you, you find a way to make it happen. You know, if it means something to you, it's important, you figure it out.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much. We hope you have your tribe like Edric and I have ours for collaboration, and we will see you in our next episode. Thanks so much.
Take care.